The morning air felt heavy as Maxwell Thornton stepped out of his black Bentley. The cemetery gates creaked open, a sound that had become too familiar over the last 5 years. His driver, Robert, offered to walk with him, but Maxwell shook his head. This journey was one he always made alone. "I'll be back in an hour," Maxwell said, his voice rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken much since the board meeting yesterday. These days he saved his words for important things, and sadly, there weren't many of those anymore. The path to David's grave was lined with oak trees that swayed gently in the spring breeze. Maxwell had paid extra to have his son buried in this peaceful corner of Green Hill Cemetery, away from the crowded family plots. Money couldn't bring David back, but it could at least buy him a quiet resting place. Maxwell's expensive leather shoes crunched on the gravel path. He carried a small bouquet of blue forget-me-nots, David's favorite. The boy had loved their color, saying they matched the sky on perfect days for flying kites. Those were the memories that haunted Maxwell the most, not the big vacations or expensive gifts, but the simple afternoons flying dollar store kites in the park. As he rounded the final bend in the path, Maxwell stopped. Someone was already at David's grave, a small figure kneeling by the headstone. Maxwell felt a flare of anger. This was his private time, his sacred hour. Who would dare intrude? He quickened his pace, ready to ask whoever it was to leave, but slowed as he got closer. It was a boy, thin, maybe 9 or 10 years old, wearing jeans with patches at the knees and a faded blue jacket that seemed too big for his small frame. The child was arranging wildflowers in front of David's headstone with careful, deliberate movements. Maxwell stood frozen, watching. There was something in the boy's careful attention that stopped him from interrupting. The child hadn't noticed him yet, too focused on his task. He was humming softly, a tune that made Maxwell's heart skip a beat. It was "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," the same song Maxwell used to sing to David at bedtime, even though neither of them cared much for baseball. The coincidence sent a chill down Maxwell's spine. He must have made some sound because the boy suddenly looked up, his eyes widening at the sight of the tall man in the expensive suit. "Sorry, sir," the boy said, scrambling to his feet. "I wasn't doing anything bad, I promise." Maxwell found his voice. "I'm not angry. This is my son's grave. You're visiting." The boy looked down at the headstone, then back at Maxwell, his eyes taking in the expensive watch-tailored suit and the grief etched into the older man's face. "You're his dad?" he asked, his voice small but not frightened. There was a steadiness to him that seemed odd for someone so young. Maxwell nodded. "Yes, David was my son." The words still hurt to say out loud, even after 5 years. "Did you know him?" The boy shifted from one foot to the other, looking down at the wildflowers he'd brought. They were nothing compared to the professional arrangement Maxwell had ordered, but they had been placed with such care. "Kind of," the boy said. "He was my friend." Maxwell frowned. That couldn't be right. David had died when he was 12. This boy couldn't be more than 10 now, which would have made him around 5 when David passed away. Too young for them to have been friends. "What's your name?" Maxwell asked, trying to keep his voice gentle despite his confusion. "Elijah," the boy said. "Elijah Thompson." Maxwell had known all of David's friends. He'd made it his business to know who his son spent time with, had invited them to the house for monitored playdates and carefully planned birthday parties. He'd never heard of an Elijah. "How did you know my son?" Maxwell asked, kneeling down to be at eye level with the boy, ignoring the dirt that would stain his $7,000 suit. Elijah looked at him with clear brown eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond his years. "It's hard to explain," he said. "Sometimes I just know things." A dog barked in the distance, making Elijah jump slightly. He looked over his shoulder as if suddenly remembering something. "I have to go now. Grandma will worry." He took a step back, then paused. "He liked the blue ones best," Elijah said, pointing to the forget-me-nots in Maxwell's hand. He said they reminded him of kite-flying days. Before Maxwell could respond, could ask how this child could possibly know that private detail, Elijah turned and ran, his two big sneakers slapping against the gravel path as he disappeared around the bend. Maxwell remained kneeling, the forget-me-nots trembling slightly, in his grip. A sense of unreality washed over him. Had he imagined the encounter? But no, the wildflowers were there, arranged in a childish but thoughtful pattern around David's name. He placed his own bouquet beside Elijah's wildflowers and traced the letters of his son's name carved into the smooth granite. David Alexander, Thornton, beloved son, 2007-2019, followed by the quote Maxwell had chosen. To live in hearts we leave behind is not to die. 5 years had passed, but the pain remained as fresh as the day he'd received the call about the accident. David had been riding his bike, a normal kid thing that Maxwell had encouraged, wanting his son to have the regular childhood he himself had missed. A distracted driver, a moment's inattention, and everything had changed. Maxwell's billions couldn't rewind time, couldn't undo the crushing impact that took his son's life in an instant. "I miss you, buddy," Maxwell whispered, the words carried away by the breeze. He sat there longer than usual, his mind replaying the strange encounter with the boy. How had Elijah known about the kites, about the blue flowers? It didn't make sense. When Maxwell finally stood, his knees cracked in protest. At 58, he was feeling his age more these days, the stress of running Thornton Technologies while nursing a broken heart taking its toll. He looked again at the wildflowers Elijah had brought. They were humble. Dandelions, clover, a few black-eyed Susans, probably picked from some nearby field. Nothing special, and yet they seemed to belong there, bright and unpretentious, just like David had been despite his privileged upbringing. On the walk back to the car, Maxwell's mind raced with questions. Who was this boy? How did he know those things about David? Should he try to find him? Robert stood waiting by the car, face impassive as always, trained not to react to his boss's red-rimmed eyes after these cemetery visits. "Change of plans," Maxwell said as he slid into the back seat. "I need to make a call." As the Bentley pulled away from Green Hills Cemetery, Maxwell was already dialing his head of security, Chen. "I need you to find someone," Maxwell said when Chen answered. "A boy named Elijah Thompson, probably around 10 years old, likely lives with his grandmother somewhere near Green Hill Cemetery." Chen didn't ask questions. After 15 years working for Maxwell, he knew better. "Anything else to go on, sir?" Maxwell thought about the patched jeans, the too big jacket, the worn sneakers. "He's not well off. Thin build, brown eyes, dark hair, intelligent, seems mature for his age. I'll see what I can find," Chen promised. Maxwell hung up and gazed out the window as the cemetery disappeared from view. For the first time in 5 years, his mind wasn't consumed by grief during the drive home. Instead, he was filled with questions about a mysterious boy who somehow knew things he couldn't possibly know. Things about blue flowers and kites, and a song about baseball that had nothing to do with the sport, and everything to do with a father's love for his son. For the first time in 5 years, Maxwell felt something stir within him that he'd thought had died along with David. Curiosity, hope, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was still something in this world worth discovering. Maxwell couldn't focus on work. 2 days had passed since his encounter with the boy at the cemetery, and he found himself checking his phone constantly for updates from Chen. Board members noticed his distraction during meetings, exchanging concerned glances when he asked them to repeat information. The last time he'd been this unfocused was in the months after David's death. "Sir, I have some information about the boy," Chen said when Maxwell answered his call on the 3rd day. Maxwell immediately stepped out of a budget meeting, ignoring the surprised looks from his executives. "Tell me," Maxwell said, pacing in the hallway outside the conference room. Elijah Thompson, age 10, lives with his grandmother, Rose Thompson, in Oakwood Apartments on the east side of town. Not the best neighborhood, but not the worst either. The grandmother is his legal guardian after his mother passed away 3 years ago. Father's not in the picture. What about school? Where does he go? There was a pause on the line. That's the interesting part, sir. He attends Westridge Academy. Maxwell stopped pacing, Westridge Academy was David's old school, one of the most prestigious private schools in the state. That can't be right. Westridge costs more than most colleges. How could a grandmother raising a child alone in Oakwood Apartments afford that? He's on scholarship, sir. Full ride, including books, uniforms, and meal plan. Maxwell's mind raced. A scholarship to Westridge was almost impossible to get. The waiting list for even wealthy families was years long. Find out who's funding the scholarship. Already did, Chen replied, and Maxwell could hear the hesitation in his voice. It's the David Thornton Memorial Scholarship. Maxwell felt like the floor had dropped away beneath him. He leaned against the wall, his heart pounding. That's not possible. I never set up a scholarship in David's name. According to the school records, it was established shortly after your son's passing. It provides for one student who shows exceptional promise, but lacks financial means. Maxwell closed his eyes, trying to process this information. He had made a large donation to Westridge after David's death, but he had never specified how it should be used. The school must have created the scholarship themselves as a tribute. But how had Elijah, of all children, become the recipient? How long has Elijah been attending Westridge? He started 3 years ago. He would have been 7. 3 years ago, that was 2 years after David died. The connection made no sense. I want to meet with the grandmother, Maxwell said decisively. Arrange it for tomorrow. Sir, people tend to get nervous when a billionaire wants to meet unexpectedly. Perhaps I should explain the situation first? Maxwell sighed. Chen was right. Tell her I met her grandson at my son's grave and just want to talk. Offer whatever. You need to make her comfortable. Money, assurances, anything. Just get me that meeting. The next day, Maxwell directed his driver to Oakwood Apartments. He had dressed down for the occasion. No suit, just slacks and a sweater that probably still cost more than most people's entire wardrobe. But at least, he wouldn't look like he'd stepped out of a board meeting. Oakwood Apartments was a tired-looking complex with faded brick and small balconies where people hung laundry to dry. Children played in a central courtyard that had seen better days, running around a rusty jungle gym and kicking a ball across patchy grass. Maxwell felt eyes on him as he walked through the courtyard. He didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. A Bentley parked on this street was like a spaceship landing in a cornfield. Apartment 307 was on the 3rd floor. There was no elevator, and by the time Maxwell reached the door, he was slightly winded, a reminder that his personal trainer had been right about adding more cardio to his workouts. He knocked and waited, straightening his posture and trying to look non-threatening. The door opened to reveal an older woman with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a neat bun. Though she had to be in her 60s, Rose Thompson stood straight-backed and dignified, her eyes sharp as they assessed the man at her door. "Mr. Thornton," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "Please, come in." The apartment was small but meticulously clean. Family photos lined the walls, many featuring Elijah at different ages. A bookshelf overflowed with children's books and school materials. The furniture was worn but well cared for. A home where pride mattered more than means. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me, Mrs. Thompson," Maxwell said, taking a seat on the offered sofa. "It's Ms." she corrected gently. "And I was curious why a man like you would be interested in my grandson." Chen explained you met at the cemetery. Maxwell nodded. "Elijah was placing flowers on my son's grave. He said David was his friend. But that doesn't seem possible given their ages." Rose's face softened with understanding. "Ah, I see. Elijah says things sometimes. Things that are hard to explain." She seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "He has a special way of knowing things. He knew about the forget-me-nots," Maxwell said. "He knew they reminded my son of flying kites. How could he know that?" Rose sighed. "Would you like some tea, Mr. Thornton?" This might be a longer conversation than I anticipated. While Rose prepared tea in the small kitchen, Maxwell noticed a shelf of medication bottles next to the sink. Several had Elijah's name on them. When she returned with 2 steaming cups, he asked, "Is Elijah ill?" "He's healthy now," Rose said, handing him a cup of tea in a mismatched mug. But he wasn't always. He had a heart condition from birth. 3 years ago, he received a transplant that saved his life. The doctors called it a miracle that a match was found in time. 3 years ago. The same time Elijah had started at Westridge Academy on the David Thornton Memorial Scholarship. Maxwell's hand trembled slightly, tea sloshing in the mug. "Where is Elijah now?" he asked. "At his after-school program. He won't be home for another hour." She studied Maxwell's face. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Mr. Thornton. Are you all right?" Before Maxwell could answer, his eyes caught sight of a journal on the coffee table, its cover decorated with handwritten stars and planets. "The Adventures of David T." was written across the front in a child's careful lettering. Rose followed his gaze. "That's Elijah's dream journal. He started keeping it after his surgery. Said he needed to write down the stories his heart was telling him." "His heart?" Maxwell echoed, setting down his tea before he dropped it. "That's how he explains it," Rose said with a small shrug. After the transplant, he began having these vivid dreams about a boy named David. He'd wake up knowing things he couldn't possibly know, places he'd never been, experiences he'd never had. The doctors say it's impossible, of course. Maxwell stared at the journal. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, Rose nodded. "Elijah shares it with his doctors. I don't think he'd mind." With unsteady hands, Maxwell opened the journal. Inside were drawings and stories, all featuring a boy named David. There were detailed sketches of a bedroom Maxwell recognized instantly, David's room, with the telescope by the window and the solar system painted on the ceiling. There were stories about a treehouse that Maxwell had built in their backyard, descriptions of family vacations to places Elijah had never been. "This is my house," Maxwell whispered, pointing to a drawing. "This is exactly what our living room looks like." "How could he know this?" Rose's eyes filled with compassion. "The doctors call it cellular memory. The idea that memories can be stored throughout the body, not just in the brain. Most medical professionals dismiss it as pseudoscience, but there are cases, unexplainable cases." Maxwell's mind raced, ahead to the impossible conclusion. The timing of his transplant, the scholarship at David's school. His voice faltered. "My son was an organ donor." Rose nodded slowly. "We were never told the donor's name. It's confidential. But Elijah has always insisted that his new heart belonged to a boy named David, who loved the color blue and flying kites." Maxwell closed the journal, his vision blurring with tears. He had approved the organ donation in his darkest hour, hoping that some good might come from his unbearable loss. Never had he imagined this. "I'd like to meet with Elijah properly," Maxwell said when he could trust his voice again. "Not as a stranger at a cemetery, but here, in his home, where he feels safe." Rose studied him, seeming to weigh something in her mind. "May I ask why?" Maxwell looked around the small apartment, at the medication bottles on the shelf, at the past-due medical bills partially hidden under a cookbook, at the worn furniture and the scholarship materials from Westridge. He saw a grandmother doing her absolute best for a boy with a special heart. "Because," Maxwell said quietly, "I think your grandson might have received more than just an organ from my son. And I need to understand what that means, for him and for me." Rose nodded as if she had been expecting this answer. "He'll be home at 4. You're welcome to stay until then." Maxwell sent a text to his driver to wait. For the first time in 5 years, there was somewhere more important for him to be than his corner office with its view of the city. There was a boy with his son's heart, coming home from school, who somehow knew about blue flowers and kites, flying high against cloudless skies. Maxwell checked his watch for the 5th time in half an hour. It was 3:55 p.m. Rose had made fresh lemonade, setting out 3 glasses on the small kitchen table. The apartment was quiet except for the ticking of an old wall clock and the distant sounds of children playing in the courtyard below. "He's always on time," Rose said, noticing Maxwell's nervousness. "The school bus drops them at the corner at 4 o'clock sharp." Maxwell nodded, trying to calm his racing heart. He'd faced down billion-dollar negotiations with less anxiety than he felt waiting for this 10-year-old boy. "May I ask you something, Ms. Thompson?" Maxwell asked, needing to fill the silence. "Of course," she replied, adjusting a framed photo of Elijah on the shelf. "How do you feel about all this? The dreams, the journal, the things Elijah seems to know." Rose sat down across from him, her weathered hands folded on the table. "At first I thought it was his imagination. Children have vivid imaginations, especially after trauma, and the transplant was traumatic. But then," she shook her head, slightly. "He started describing places he'd never been, people he'd never met. He drew pictures of your house, that big white house on the hill with the glass sunroom in the back, and the stone pathway leading to the garden." Maxwell's breath caught. Their home wasn't featured in magazines or social media. The Thorntons valued their privacy too much for that. "How did you feel when you realized it might be more than imagination?" Maxwell asked. Rose's eyes grew distant. "Scared at first, I took him to doctors, psychologists. They suggested it was something he'd seen on TV or overheard somewhere. But Elijah kept insisting it was his heart telling him stories." She smiled softly. "Eventually, I stopped being afraid and started listening. What harm was there in letting him talk about David? It seemed to bring him comfort." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them both look toward the door. Keys jingled, and then the door swung open. Elijah froze in the doorway when he saw Maxwell, his backpack half slipped from his shoulder. He was wearing the Westridge Academy uniform, navy blue pants and a white shirt with the school crest. The clothes were slightly too large, probably sized to allow him to grow into them. "Hello, Elijah," Maxwell said, trying to keep his voice steady. Elijah looked at his grandmother questioningly. "It's okay," she assured him. "Mr. Thornton wanted to talk to you. I made lemonade." Elijah set his backpack down carefully by the door and took off his shoes, placing them neatly on a small mat. He moved with the cautious deliberation of a child who had spent time in hospitals, who knew how precious and fragile life could be. "You're David's dad," Elijah said, as he sat at the table. "From the cemetery." Maxwell nodded. "Your grandmother and I have been talking. She told me about your heart transplant." Elijah took a sip of lemonade, his eyes never leaving Maxwell's face. "Are you mad at me?" The question caught Maxwell off guard. "Mad? Why would I be mad?" Elijah fidgeted with his glass. "For knowing things about David. Some adults get upset when I talk about it. They think I'm making stuff up." "I'm not mad," Maxwell assured him. "I'm curious and a little confused." Rose touched her grandson's shoulder. "Mr. Thornton saw your journal, The Adventures of David T., Maxwell said. Elijah's face brightened. "Do you want to see more? I have 2 other journals filled up, and I'm working on a new one." Without waiting for an answer, he jumped up and ran to his bedroom, returning moments later with 3 notebooks of varying sizes. "This was my first one," he said, handing Maxwell a spiral notebook with dog-eared pages. "I was just learning to write good, so Grandma helped me with some of the words." Maxwell opened it gently. The first pages were filled with wobbly handwriting and simple drawings, but even these early entries contained details that made Maxwell's skin prickle. A drawing of David's dog, a golden retriever named Buddy who had died a year before David. A sketch of the treehouse with the secret ladder. A list of David's favorite ice cream flavors in perfect order: mint chocolate chip, cookie dough, strawberry. "How do you know these things, Elijah?" Maxwell asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elijah looked at him as if the answer were obvious. "My heart remembers. Sometimes when I'm sleeping, my heart shows me pictures like watching a movie. And sometimes during the day, I just know things without knowing how I know." "Like what?" Maxwell prompted. Elijah closed his eyes for a moment. "Your house has a big kitchen with blue tiles on the floor. There's a dent in the refrigerator door from when David tried to skateboard inside when you were on a business trip. His mom got really mad, but she never told you because she didn't want him to get in double trouble." Maxwell stared at the boy in astonishment. The skateboard incident had been a secret between David and his mother. She had mentioned it to Maxwell only after David's death, sharing memories of their son's mischievous side. What else? Maxwell asked, his voice hoarse. David had a secret hiding place in his closet where he kept special things. Behind the panel where the light switch is, you have to push it just right, and it slides open. Maxwell felt lightheaded. He'd discovered the hiding spot months after the funeral when he finally found the courage to sort through David's belongings. Inside, he'd found treasures his son had collected: a smooth stone from their trip to the lake, a feather from a blue jay, the ticket stub from their first baseball game together. Has anyone ever taken you to our house, Elijah? Have you ever been there? Elijah shook his head. Only in my heart dreams. Maxwell looked to Rose, who was watching them both with tears in her eyes. There's more, she said quietly. Tell him about the message, Elijah. Elijah bit his lip, suddenly looking uncertain. Sometimes there's a message that comes with the dreams. It's always the same. He hesitated. It's okay, Rose encouraged. You can tell him. Elijah took a deep breath. The message says, tell Dad it wasn't his fault. Tell him I'm okay. Maxwell felt as if he'd been struck. Since the accident, he had carried a crushing weight of guilt. If he hadn't encouraged David to bike to his friend's house that day, if he had insisted on driving him instead, if he had left work early as he'd first planned. I asked Elijah who Dad was, Rose said gently. He said it was David's father, but he had no way of knowing about your son, Mr. Thornton. We didn't know who the donor was. The hospital keeps that information confidential. Maxwell tried to speak, but no words came. His vision blurred with tears. For 5 years he had been drowning in guilt and grief, unable to forgive himself for not protecting his son. David says you still play chess by yourself sometimes, Elijah continued, his small voice cutting through Maxwell's thoughts. But you always play both sides, and you always let the white pieces win because those were the ones he used to play. A sob escaped Maxwell's throat. He did exactly that, set up the chessboard in David's room and played both sides, always ensuring that David's preferred white pieces won. It was a private ritual he had told no one about. He says it's okay to let the black pieces win sometimes, Elijah added. He says it's more fun that way. Maxwell covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. He had faced countless challenges in business, had built an empire from nothing, had survived divorce and betrayal and cutthroat competition. But he had no defense against the words of this small boy with his son's heart. Mr. Thornton? Elijah's voice was concerned. Did I say something wrong? Maxwell shook his head, trying to compose himself. No, Elijah, you said everything right. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I'm sorry. I don't usually cry in front of people. David says you cry in the car sometimes, Elijah said, matter-of-factly. After you visit the cemetery. He says that's okay too. Rose placed a hand on Elijah's arm. Why don't you show Mr. Thornton your science project while I make dinner? You can stay if you'd like, she added, looking at Maxwell. Maxwell nodded gratefully, needing time to process everything he'd heard. Elijah brightened. It's about the heart. I got an A+. My teacher said it was the best project in the class. As Elijah ran to get his project, Maxwell looked at Rose. I don't know what to think about all this, he admitted. Neither did I at first, she said. The doctors have their explanations, that Elijah picked up information somewhere, that it's all coincidence. But after a while, coincidence stops being a satisfying answer. What do you think is happening? Maxwell asked. Rose smiled softly. I think some bonds are too strong to be broken, even by death. I think your son found a way to leave you a message. She touched Maxwell's hand briefly. And I think he chose the perfect messenger. Elijah returned with a cardboard display board covered with diagrams of the human heart, beaming with pride. As he explained his project, his eyes bright with enthusiasm, Maxwell saw something he had missed during their first encounters. Beyond the information Elijah couldn't possibly know, beyond the impossible connection, was simply a bright, caring, boy who had been given a second chance at life. And in that moment, surrounded by the simple warmth of this modest apartment, listening to Elijah explain the chambers of the heart with the scientific precision of a much older child, Maxwell began to feel something he thought had died with David: hope. 2 weeks after meeting Elijah properly, Maxwell sat in his home office staring at the stack of papers his lawyers had prepared. A trust fund for Elijah's education, medical care coverage, a housing allowance, all the things money could buy. But as he picked up his pen to sign, Maxwell hesitated. Would throwing money at the situation really honor what was happening here? Was that all he had to offer? Financial security? It felt hollow somehow, like he was trying to buy his way into Elijah's life, rather than earning his place there. The phone on his desk rang, breaking his thoughts. It was Dr. Patel, the heart transplant specialist he'd been consulting with. "Mr. Thornton, I've reviewed the case materials you sent over," Dr. Patel said. "I have to say, while the boy's knowledge is certainly unusual, there are always rational explanations. Children are impressionable. They pick up information from various sources. He knows about the dent in my refrigerator," Maxwell interrupted. "He knows about a secret compartment in my son's closet that even the housekeepers didn't know about. He knows that I play chess against myself and always let the white pieces win." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Dr. Patel, I'm not asking you to verify whether cellular memory is real. I'm asking you what I should do now. How do I help this boy?" Dr. Patel sighed. "From a medical standpoint, Elijah appears to be doing well. The anti-rejection medications are working, his body has accepted the heart. That's what matters most." "And from a human standpoint?" Maxwell pressed. "From a human standpoint," Dr. Patel said slowly, "I would say that both you and Elijah have been given something rare, a connection that defies explanation. Whatever you choose to do with that connection should come from your heart, not just your wallet." After hanging up, Maxwell looked again at the legal papers. They suddenly seemed inadequate, like trying to respond to a miracle with a business contract. He pushed them aside and picked up a different set of papers, the research he'd been doing on cellular memory and consciousness. Most mainstream scientists dismissed the concept, but there were enough case studies to make him wonder. Heart transplant recipients who suddenly craved foods they'd never liked before. A woman who developed a taste for beer and chicken nuggets after her heart transplant, only to discover those had been her donor's favorite foods. A child who became afraid of water after receiving the heart of a drowning victim. Was it possible? Could memories, preferences, even messages somehow be stored in the cells of the heart? Maxwell's phone buzzed with a text from Rose. "Elijah asking if you're coming to his school presentation tomorrow." For the past 2 weeks, Maxwell had been visiting regularly, getting to know Elijah. They'd played chess, with Elijah somehow knowing the rules despite never having been taught, flown kites in the park and talked about science, Elijah's favorite subject. The boy never mentioned David during these outings, and Maxwell never pushed. They were building their own relationship, whatever strange foundation it might rest upon. Maxwell texted back, "Wouldn't miss it," and then added a smiley face, something he hadn't done in text messages since David died. The next day, Maxwell sat in a small folding chair in Westridge Academy's auditorium, feeling both out of place and strangely at home. He'd attended countless events here when David was a student, always sitting in the front row, always checking emails on his phone when the presentations dragged on too long. Today, he kept his phone in his pocket. Today, he watched every child's presentation with interest, waiting for Elijah's turn. "You're Elijah Thompson's uncle?" the mother sitting next to him asked during a break. "Family friend," Maxwell replied, the words feeling both true and incomplete. When Elijah took the stage for his science presentation on the human heart, Maxwell felt his chest tighten with a strange mix of pride and sorrow. The boy spoke with confidence unusual for his age, explaining the heart's functions with precise detail. At one point, he looked directly at Maxwell and smiled, and the resemblance to David, not physical, but something in the expression, the enthusiasm, took Maxwell's breath away. After the presentations, Maxwell waited in the hallway as instructed. Rose had taken the day off work to attend, but had to leave for a doctor's appointment of her own. Maxwell had offered to take Elijah for ice cream and then drive him home. As they walked to the car, Elijah reached for Maxwell's hand naturally, as if they'd been doing this for years. Maxwell felt a lump in his throat as those small fingers wrapped around his. "You didn't look at your phone once during my presentation," Elijah said as they drove to the ice cream parlor. "No, I was paying attention," Maxwell replied. Then he frowned slightly. "Wait, how did you know I usually check my phone during school presentations?" Elijah shrugged. "I just know. David used to get sad about it. He worked really hard on his solar system project in 3rd grade. But you were on a business call in the hallway and missed most of it." Maxwell gripped the steering wheel tighter. It was true. He'd had an emergency with an overseas client and had missed David's presentation. He'd apologized later, but he'd never known how much it had hurt his son. "I'm sorry about that," Maxwell said quietly. "It's okay," Elijah replied, looking out the window. "David understood you had important work. He just wished you could see the planets he made. He used styrofoam balls and painted them all the right colors. His Saturn even had rings made from an old CD he cut up." Maxwell had to pull the car over, overcome by a wave of regret and grief. The solar system project. David had been so proud of it, and Maxwell had seen only the finished product, not the presentation his son had worked so hard on. "Mr. Thornton, are you okay?" Elijah asked, concern in his voice. Maxwell nodded, not trusting himself to speak just yet. "David's not mad at you," Elijah said softly. "He just wanted you to know." After ice cream, Maxwell drove Elijah home, his mind racing with thoughts. As they pulled up to Oakwood Apartments, he made a decision. "Elijah, would you and your grandmother like to come to dinner at my house this weekend? I could show you the treehouse and the telescope," and his voice trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Elijah's eyes widened. "The real treehouse? With the secret ladder and the trapdoor?" "That's the one," Maxwell said with a small smile. "Yes." Elijah bounced in, his seat. "Can we really go?" "I'll talk to your grandmother, but I think we can arrange it." That evening, Maxwell sat in his empty mansion, the stack of legal papers still unsigned on his desk. He'd been approaching this all wrong. Yes, he would still set up the trust fund, still make sure Elijah had the best medical care, still help Rose with housing. But throwing money at the situation wasn't enough. It would never be enough. He picked up his phone and called his executive assistant. "Cancel my trip to Tokyo next week," he said, "and clear my schedule for Friday afternoon. I need to visit Westridge Academy." "Sir?" His assistant sounded confused. "But the Tokyo merger, Chen can handle it," Maxwell said firmly. "I have something more important to do." The next morning, Maxwell walked into the lobby of Thornton Technologies' main building with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He nodded to the receptionist and headed straight for the elevator, ignoring the surprised looks from employees not used to seeing the CEO arrive before 9 a.m. In his office, he called in his Chief of Research and Development, Dr. Lin, and his Head of Philanthropic Initiatives, Mrs. Winters. "I have a new direction I want to explore," Maxwell announced once they were seated. "A new product line?" Dr. Lin asked. "No," Maxwell shook his head. "A new research initiative. I want to establish a center for the study of cellular memory, consciousness, and heart transplantation. I want the best minds, the best equipment, the best facilities, and I want to partner with children's hospitals across the country." Dr. Lin and Mrs. Winters exchanged glances. "That's quite a departure from our usual tech focus," Mrs. Winters said carefully. "It is," Maxwell agreed. "But sometimes life takes us in unexpected directions." He pulled up a photo on his phone, Elijah at the ice cream parlor, grinning with a chocolate mustache. "This is Elijah Thompson. He received my son's heart in a transplant 3 years ago, and he somehow knows things about David that he couldn't possibly know." For the next hour, Maxwell explained the situation, showing them Elijah's journals, sharing the impossible details the boy knew. "I don't know if science can explain what's happening here," Maxwell concluded, "but I know it deserves to be studied." And I know there are other transplant recipients out there, other children and families with stories to tell. Dr. Lin looked thoughtful. It would be a challenging field to research properly. Anecdotal evidence is hard to verify, and there would be significant skepticism from the scientific community. I know, Maxwell nodded. But some things are worth fighting for, even if success isn't guaranteed. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. For 5 years, I've been running this company on autopilot, going through the motions. Meeting Elijah has reminded me why I started this company in the first place. To make a difference, to push boundaries, to explore what's possible. He turned back to face them. We have the resources to do this right, and I have a personal stake in making it happen. Mrs. Winters smiled slowly. It's good to see you passionate about something again, Mr. Thornton. I'll start drafting a foundation proposal. We'll need to establish clear goals, outreach programs, and research parameters, Dr. Lin added, already jotting notes. We should consult with cardiologists, neurologists, consciousness researchers. As they discussed details, Maxwell felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time since losing David, he had found a purpose that resonated with his heart as well as his mind. Whether or not science could ever explain Elijah's connection to David, the journey to find answers would help countless other transplant recipients and their families. And perhaps most importantly, it would help a small boy with a remarkable heart know that his experiences mattered, that his story deserved to be heard, and that the impossible bond he shared with a boy he'd never met in life had the power to heal not just one grieving father, but potentially many others like him. 3 years passed, like the turning of pages in one of Elijah's journals. Seasons changed, birthdays came and went, and the connection between Maxwell and Elijah grew stronger with each passing day. On a bright spring morning, Maxwell adjusted his tie in the mirror and checked his watch. It was a big day, the official opening of the David Thornton Memorial Children's Hospital and Research Center. After years of planning, construction, and preparation, the dream was becoming reality. Need help with that tie? Rose asked, entering the room. At 65, she looked 10 years younger than when Maxwell had first met her. Regular medical care, reduced stress, and a newfound sense of purpose had worked wonders. I've been tying ties for 40 years, Maxwell grumbled good-naturedly. But somehow they never look right on important days. Rose smiled and straightened, his already perfect tie. It looks fine, you're just nervous. Where's Elijah? Maxwell asked. Still getting dressed. You know how he is with buttons. Maxwell smiled, knowing exactly how the now 13-year-old struggled with shirt buttons due to slight tremors in his hands, a minor side effect of his medications. In the past 3 years, Maxwell had learned all of Elijah's habits, his struggles, his triumphs. They had become family in all the ways that mattered. The move from Oakwood Apartments had happened gradually. First, Maxwell helped Rose find a better apartment closer to Westridge Academy. Then, when Rose's arthritis worsened, he suggested they move into his guest house. Eventually, it seemed silly to maintain that separation, and Rose and Elijah moved into the main house. Maxwell's empty mansion became a home again, filled with Elijah's laughter and Rose's cooking. Maxwell had changed too. He had stepped back from day-to-day operations at Thornton Technologies, focusing instead on the foundation and research center. His former colleagues barely recognized the man who now coached Elijah's science club, attended PTA meetings, and could speak knowledgeably about middle school social dynamics. "Ready," Elijah announced, bounding into the room. He was wearing a suit that matched Maxwell's, though his tie was slightly crooked. He had grown taller over the past 3 years but was still small for his age, a result of his early health problems. What he lacked in size he made up for in energy and intelligence. Maxwell felt his throat tighten with emotion. Standing there in his suit, with his serious expression, Elijah reminded him so much of David at that age. Not in looks. David had been fair-haired and blue-eyed while Elijah had dark hair and eyes, but in spirit. "Let me fix that tie," Maxwell said, kneeling down to adjust it. As he did, he felt the familiar surge of protectiveness and love that had become part of his daily life. Nervous about your speech? Elijah shook his head. Not really. I've been practicing with Dr. Whitman. Dr. Whitman was Elijah's therapist, a kind woman who had helped him navigate the strangeness of his experiences and the changes in his life. I'm more worried about you. You hate public speaking. Maxwell laughed. It was true. Despite running a global company, he had always avoided speaking to large groups. I'll manage. Just stay close, okay? Always, Elijah promised, the word carrying more weight than a typical 13-year-old's assurances. The drive to the hospital was quiet, each lost in their thoughts. The new facility stood on a hill overlooking the city, its modern glass and steel structure gleaming in the morning sun. It had been built on land Maxwell owned, adjacent to the city's main medical center. As they pulled up to the entrance, Maxwell saw the crowd gathered for the opening ceremony. Hospital staff, research scientists, donors, city officials, patients, and their families. Hundreds of people waiting to celebrate what many newspapers were calling Maxwell's second act. Mr. Thornton, reporters called as they exited the car. Can you comment on the rumors that your research team has documented over 50 cases similar to Elijah's? Is it true you've funded a multi-million-dollar study on cellular memory? Will the hospital focus exclusively on transplant patients? Maxwell held up his hand. All your questions will be answered during the ceremony. But yes, this hospital will serve all children, with a special focus on transplant recipients. And yes, our research has uncovered many cases that suggest memories may be stored throughout the body, not just in the brain. Inside, they were greeted by Dr. Lin, now the director of research at the center. Everything's ready, she assured them. The mayor's here, the ribbon is in place, and the children's choir is warming up. The children from the transplant support group? Elijah asked eagerly. Dr. Lin nodded. They're excited to see you. You're something of a celebrity among them, you know. Over the past 3 years, as word spread about the foundation's work, families had come forward with their own stories. A teenage girl who received a kidney and suddenly developed a passion for ballet, the same passion her donor had had. A young boy who received a liver and began speaking phrases in Korean, despite never having heard the language, phrases his donor's family recognized. Each case was carefully documented, studied, and supported. Elijah had become a mentor to many of these children, showing them it was okay to talk about their experiences, to embrace the strange connections they felt to their donors. His support group had grown from 5 children to over 30, meeting weekly at Thornton Technologies Community Center. Ready? Maxwell asked as they approached the doors leading to the outdoor ceremony area. Elijah took a deep breath and nodded. Ready? The ceremony began with speeches from the mayor and various dignitaries. Maxwell sat on stage watching the crowd, still amazed by how his life had changed. In the front row sat the families from Elijah's support group, including Andy, a 7-year-old who received a lung transplant, and afterward could suddenly play piano pieces his donor had mastered. Lily, a teenager who received a kidney and developed her donor's talent for mathematics, and dozens of others with similar stories. When it was Maxwell's turn to speak, he approached the podium slowly. Public speaking had never been his strength, but today the words came easily. 3 years ago, I met a young boy at my son's grave, he began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. That meeting changed my life in ways I could never have imagined. Many of you know the story. How Elijah received my son David's heart, and how he somehow knew things about David he couldn't possibly know. Maxwell paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Science doesn't yet have all the answers for what happened between Elijah and me. Cellular memory remains controversial in medical circles. Some call it coincidence, some call it miracle, some believe memories are stored throughout our bodies in ways we're just beginning to understand. He gestured toward the gleaming hospital building behind him. This center isn't built on definitive answers. It's built on questions, the questions that arise when we open ourselves to possibilities beyond our current understanding. It's built on hope, the hope that connections between donors and recipients might bring comfort to grieving families. And it's built on support, ensuring that children who experience these connections have a safe place to share their stories without fear of disbelief or dismissal. Maxwell turned slightly to look at Elijah, who was watching him with pride. Most importantly, this center is built on love. The love of a father for his son, a love that didn't end with death, but somehow found a new expression, a love that expanded to include a remarkable young boy and his grandmother, who have become my family in every way that matters. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience as Maxwell continued, explaining the hospital's mission to provide cutting-edge care while also studying the mysterious connections between donors and recipients. When it was Elijah's turn to speak, he approached the microphone with confidence that belied his age. At 13, his voice was just beginning to change, occasionally cracking in that distinctive teenage way. But today, it was clear and strong. 3 years ago, I told Mr. Thornton that my heart was telling me stories, Elijah said. Back then, I was afraid people would think I was crazy or making things up. But Mr. Thornton listened. He believed me, and because of that, hundreds of other kids like me have found the courage to share their own stories. Elijah gestured to the children in the front row. We are not weird or making things up. We're just experiencing something science doesn't fully understand yet. And thanks to this new hospital and research center, maybe someday it will. After the speeches, Maxwell and Elijah together cut the ribbon, officially opening the David Thornton Memorial Children's Hospital and Research Center. As applause erupted and cameras flashed, Elijah leaned close to Maxwell. David says you finally got it right, he whispered. Maxwell looked down at him, startled. Elijah rarely mentioned receiving messages from David anymore. Most of his heart knowledge, as he called it, came in the form of memories or preferences rather than direct communications. Got what right? Maxwell asked quietly. The thing you've been trying to figure out since he died, Elijah explained. About why bad things happen to good people. David says it's not about why they happen. It's about what you do afterward that matters. Maxwell felt tears sting his eyes as the profound simplicity of the message sank in. For years after David's death, he had tortured himself with questions about why. Why his son? Why so young? Why in such a senseless accident? But the journey with Elijah had shifted his focus from why to what now. What could he do to honor David's memory? What could he build from the ashes of his grief? What love could he still give to the world? As they walked through the hospital doors for the first time, Elijah slipped his hand into Maxwell's, a gesture he had made countless times over the past 3 years. Behind them came Rose, Dr. Lynn, and the families from the support group. Ahead of them stretched hallways where children would be healed, research labs where mysteries would be explored, and community spaces where stories would be shared. You know, Maxwell said softly, when I first met you at the cemetery, I thought finding you was the miracle. It wasn't? Elijah asked, looking up at him. Maxwell shook his head. No, the real miracle was what happened after, how you helped me find my heart again. Elijah smiled, his eyes wise beyond their years. David says that's how miracles work. They don't just happen once. They keep unfolding as long as you pay attention. As they continued their tour of the hospital, Maxwell reflected on the strange, beautiful journey that had brought them here, from a chance meeting at a graveside to this moment of creation and possibility. Science might never fully explain the connection between Elijah and David, between a grieving billionaire and a boy with his son's heart. But some things didn't need complete explanations to be true, to be powerful, to change lives. Some things just needed to be lived, one heartbeat at a time.